You work for me. The words hit me in the chest like a shove. We were in the middle of the board meeting. 12 executives sat around a long glass table. The Chicago skyline stretched behind them in gray and blue. My slide was still glowing on the screen, showing the cost savings from the new logistics plan. Richard Callahan leaned back in his chair, calm and smug. I think we should remember, he said, folding his hands, who this proposal belongs to. Silence filled the room. My fingers were still wrapped around the clicker. My mouth went dry. He was taking credit. Again. But this time, it was in front of the board. I felt heat rise in my face. Not from shame. From anger. Because what he didn't know was that this meeting was not what he thought it was. And neither was I. I did not argue. That was what he wanted. A reaction. A scene. Something he could call emotional. Instead, I forced a small smile. Calm. Controlled. Inside, my heart was racing. Richard believed he had just put me in my place. He thought the board would nod and move on. He thought I would shrink back into the corner he liked to keep me in. But the board members were not looking at him. They were looking at me. And they had already seen this plan before. Without him in the room. I kept my voice steady and said, Would you like me to continue with the performance data? Richard gave a tight nod, like he was granting permission. The clicker felt heavy in my hand. He thought he owned this moment. He was wrong. My name is Victoria Whitman. I was 34 years old, and I had worked at Whitmore Industrial Systems for 3 years. I was a senior operations strategist. That meant I fixed problems no one else wanted to touch. I built systems. I cut waste. I improved delivery times. I saved the company money. And for 3 years, Richard stood in front of rooms like this and accepted praise for work I created. At first, I told myself it was teamwork. That credit did not matter as long as the job got done. But then the pattern became clear. Private praise. Public correction. Victoria helped. Victoria supported. Never. Victoria led. Today was different. Today he said it out loud. You work for me. And something inside me shifted. Richard had a system. He complimented me in his office with the door closed. You're my secret weapon, he once said. Then in meetings, he would adjust my numbers or reframe my strategy. He would say things like, Let's simplify what Victoria is trying to say. Trying. As if I was confused. Last quarter, I redesigned our warehouse routing plan. It saved the company $2.4 million in 6 months. He presented it as a leadership initiative. I sat in the back and took notes. I learned something important that day. If you want credit, keep records. So I started saving drafts, emails, timestamps, spreadsheets with creation data. Not because I planned to fight, but because I planned to be ready. 2 weeks before that board meeting, I got an email from Eleanor Brooks, the chairwoman of the board. Victoria, I would appreciate a brief discussion regarding operational strategy. Confidential. Not from Richard. From her. I walked into her office that Friday afternoon with my laptop and a folder of printed reports. She studied me in silence for a moment. We've noticed strong improvements in operations, she said. But we're not fully clear on the source. I understood what she was asking. Not who was loud. Who was responsible. So I showed her. Not with complaints. With documentation. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as she flipped through the timestamp drafts. That was the first crack in Richard's perfect image. The board had started a quiet audit. They did not announce it. They did not accuse anyone. They simply wanted clarity. Richard loved attention. He filled rooms with words. I preferred numbers. Eleanor asked me simple questions. Who created the first version of the routing model? Who designed the vendor negotiations spreadsheet? Who drafted the cost forecast? I answered calmly. Then I opened my laptop and showed her. Metadata does not lie. The earliest drafts had my name. The revision history showed my edits. Richard's name appeared only near the end. Interesting, she murmured. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I just nodded. I left her office that day with a quiet understanding. The board was watching. And the next meeting would matter. Now we were back in that boardroom. Richard had just claimed my proposal as his. Eleanor did not react right away. She simply tilted her head. Interesting, she said again. Richard smiled, thinking she approved. He did not notice the way another board member leaned forward. Or how two of them opened the printed packets in front of them. Packets I had provided earlier that week. Without Richard, the air felt thick. I moved to the next slide and explained the projected savings over 12 months. I spoke clearly, slowly. Not once did I say, I did this. I did not need to. The documents in their hands already told that story. Richard shifted slightly in his seat. For the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. One of the board members cleared his throat. Victoria, he said, not looking at Richard. Can you walk us through the development timeline? My pulse steadied. This was not random. I nodded and explained the 6-month process. The first draft in January. The pilot test in March. The cost review in May. I listed dates. I described each revision. I referenced emails. I spoke as someone who had lived every detail. Richard tried to interrupt once, as I directed, but the board member held up a hand. Let her finish. The room went very quiet. I finished with the final slide and stepped back. The numbers stood on their own. And so did I. I saw it then. The flicker. Richard's smile faded just a little. He had assumed this was a performance. A show where he stood center stage. He did not realize it was a review. The board members exchanged looks. Small, subtle ones. Eleanor closed her folder. Thank you, Victoria, she said. That was thorough. Thorough. She did not thank Richard. The meeting moved on, but the tone had changed. When it ended, chairs scraped softly against the floor. Papers slid into briefcases. Richard stood quickly, jaw tight. He did not speak until we reached the hallway. Then he grabbed my arm. You embarrassed me in there, he hissed. I gently pulled my arm free. I answered their question. He stepped closer. You made it sound like you did everything alone. I described the process, I said evenly. His face reddened. Remember who signs your performance review. I held his gaze. I do. But I also remembered something else. The board, not Richard, approved promotions at his level. He walked away first. That afternoon, I returned to my desk and updated my documentation file. I noted the date, the comment, the physical contact. Not out of anger, out of habit, because when people feel cornered, they make mistakes. And Richard had just started feeling cornered. The retaliation began quietly. I was removed from 2 weekly leadership meetings. My analyst, Marcus, was reassigned without notice. I was no longer copied on certain emails. It was obvious. It was also sloppy. I continued doing my job. I met deadlines. I improved metrics. And I documented every change in my responsibilities. When Richard gave unclear instructions, I followed up in writing. Just confirming your request, I would type. He grew shorter in his replies. One afternoon, he told a colleague I was struggling with scope. I heard about it within the hour. Instead of confronting him, I requested a performance feedback session by email and copied HR. He declined. That, too, went into my file. Pressure does strange things to people. It was starting to show. Then he made a mistake. He forwarded a summary email to the board regarding his operational model. But he forgot to remove an earlier message in the chain. In it, he had written to a manager, Victoria's operational models are strong, but positioning them as mine keeps messaging cleaner. Keeps messaging cleaner. I read those words 3 times. I did not respond. I did not send it to anyone. I did not need to. The board received the full thread. Within an hour, I saw Eleanor's assistant walking toward Richard's office. He closed the door behind her. It stayed closed for 45 minutes. When it opened, his face was pale. He did not look at me as he walked past. For the first time in 3 years, he looked unsure. 3 days later, he was called upstairs again. This time it was not just Eleanor. 2 other board members were present. The floor buzzed with quiet speculation. I kept working. When he returned, he avoided eye contact with everyone. He shut his office door and stayed inside for the rest of the day. By Friday, rumors spread. Executive review. Leadership conduct. No one said my name, but they did not need to. Richard suddenly began praising me in meetings. Victoria did great work on that report. The tone was forced. People noticed. Authenticity cannot be added after the fact. Trust, once cracked, does not seal easily. And the board had seen enough to start asking harder questions. The whispers grew louder. Compliance requested copies of budget approvals from the past year. Finance asked for clarification on several vendor contracts. Richard's signature was on all of them. He began staying late. His office light glowed long after most people left. One afternoon, he called me in. "I may have underestimated your ambition," he said carefully. I said nothing. "We are a team," he added. "We should protect each other." Protect. The word felt heavy. "I have always protected the work," I replied. He studied me, trying to read something in my face. There was nothing to read. I had already given the board everything they asked for. Facts do not change based on tone, and the facts were now in motion. Eleanor called me upstairs again. Her office overlooked the river. The city moved below us like nothing was happening. "We are evaluating departmental leadership," she said. Her voice was calm. "We value integrity and clarity." I understood. "This company deserves accurate representation," I said. She nodded once. "Would you be prepared to step in if necessary?" My chest tightened, but I kept my expression steady. "If it serves the company, yes." She did not promise anything. She did not need to. When I left her office, I felt the weight of possibility. Not victory. Responsibility. And I knew the next few weeks would decide everything. That Friday evening, Richard waited by my desk. Most of the staff had already gone home. "I need you to clarify things upstairs," he said quietly. "There seems to be confusion." "There isn't," I replied. His shoulders sagged slightly. "You know how politics work. I know how documentation works." His jaw tightened. "I have supported you for years. In private," I said before I could stop myself. The silence stretched. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the boardroom. "You work for me." I gathered my bag. "I have already clarified everything," I said. And I walked away. The board met without department heads the following week. No announcements were made. No emails were sent. Work continued as usual. But everyone felt the shift. Richard spoke less in meetings. He stopped making bold claims. He deferred questions to managers. It was strange to watch. A man who once filled every space now seemed smaller. By Thursday, an internal memo announced a formal leadership transition review for operations. Careful wording. Neutral tone. But it meant one thing. His position was no longer secure. He was not fired that day. Instead, he was placed under structured evaluation. Slower, more controlled, more permanent, and the process had only begun. I thought it might end there. I was wrong. Compliance expanded the audit. They found irregular budget reallocations tied to projects Richard had presented as his own. Nothing illegal, but risky. He had shifted funds without full approval to speed up timelines and claim results faster. The board did not like surprises, especially financial ones. I was asked to provide clarification on several projects. I did so calmly, explaining original projections versus revised ones. Each time, the paper trail led back to him. The review widened. Other managers were interviewed. Small cracks became visible fractures. And for the first time, I saw something close to fear in Richard's eyes when he walked past my desk. The long game was no longer quiet. It was unfolding. His allies began to distance themselves. People who once laughed at his jokes now avoided his office. Invitations to lunch stopped. Power fades quickly when it is questioned. He stopped holding weekly team meetings. Updates came through short emails. He rarely looked at me. One afternoon, Marcus told me, "This feels different." "It is," I said. But I did not celebrate. I focused on stabilizing the department. I checked in with staff. I ensured deadlines were met. If leadership was shifting, performance could not suffer. The board noticed that too. Consistency matters. Richard tried one last presentation to regain control. It felt rushed, defensive. Afterward, a board member asked him for supporting data. He did not have it ready. The silence in that room said everything. Monday morning, the company-wide email arrived at 8:07 a.m. Richard Callahan will be stepping down from his role as Director of Operations effective immediately. No details, no explanation, just final. I read it twice. Around me, keyboards paused. Soft murmurs filled the office. Richard's office door was already open. His nameplate had been removed. There was no dramatic goodbye. No speech. He was simply gone. His own decisions had written that ending. I felt many things in that moment. Relief, sadness, validation, but not triumph, because leadership is not about winning against someone. It is about protecting the work. And now the work needed direction. At 10:30 a.m., I was asked to come upstairs. Eleanor and 2 board members waited. "Victoria," she said, "we would like you to step in as interim director of operations." The word interim hung in the air. I nodded slowly. "I accept," I said. Then I added, "But I have one request." They looked surprised. "We need clearer systems for attribution and approval," I continued. "No more blurred lines." Eleanor smiled slightly. Agreed? That mattered more than the title. When I left that office, the hallway felt different. He had once said I worked for him. Now I worked for the entire department. And I would lead it differently. Walking back onto the floor felt surreal. Heads lifted. Conversations paused. No one clapped. They did not need to. Respect showed in smaller ways. Straightened posture. Quiet nods. Marcus approached first. "Congratulations," he said softly. "Let's get back to work," I replied with a small smile. I gathered the team for a brief meeting. "We will focus on stability," I said. Clear communication. Shared credit. No long speeches. Just direction. As the day moved forward, I felt steady. Not powerful. Grounded. Because leadership is not about standing above others. It is about standing with them. And I intended to prove that every single day. A week later, the board called me upstairs again. This time, there was no uncertainty in their faces. "The review is complete," Eleanor said. "We would like to confirm you as permanent director of operations." Permanent. I inhaled slowly. "Thank you," I said. Then she added something that surprised me. "We had begun succession discussions 6 months ago. Before the board meeting. Before the email mistake. Richard had already been under informal observation. His outburst in that meeting had accelerated the timeline. He had not lost everything in one day. He had lost it piece by piece. I walked out of that room with a new title. But more importantly, with clarity. Integrity had outlasted ego. I cleaned out Richard's old office myself. Not out of spite. Out of closure. The shelves were nearly empty. A few binders remained. On the bottom shelf, I found printed drafts of my proposals. My charts. My language. His name was written across the top in thick black ink. I stared at them for a long moment. Then I placed them back on the shelf. I did not need to erase his name. History had already done that. When I stepped out of the office, Facilities was installing a new nameplate. Victoria Whitman. I touched the cool metal lightly. Not to claim power, but to remind myself what it took to stand there. Patience. Proof. And quiet strength. When he said, "You work for me," he believed it meant control. But I had always worked for something bigger. For the results. For the team. For my own future. The loudest voice in the room is not always the strongest. Sometimes strength is steady hands, clear records, and calm truth. I did not win because I fought harder. I won because I prepared longer. Because when the board looked for clarity, I gave them facts. When they looked for leadership, I gave them consistency. And when the moment came, I stood ready. It was never about revenge. It was about recognition. And that recognition felt better than any argument ever could. I no longer worked for a man who doubted me. I led a department that trusted me. And that made all the difference.